This episode of The Biggest Table is brought to you in part by Wild Goose Coffee. Since 2008, Wild Goose has sought to build better communities through coffee. And for our listeners, Wild Goose is offering a special promotion of 20% off a one-time order using the code TABLE at checkout. To learn more and to order coffee, please visit wildgoosecoffee.com. Also, please join me at Theology Beer Camp October 17th through the 19th in Denver, Colorado. Theology Beer Camp is a unique 3-day conference that brings together theology nerds and craft beer for a blend of intellectual engagement, community building, and fun. And because I am one of the God Pods at the conference, you as a listener can receive $50 off your ticket by using the code BIGGESTTABLE4CAMP, all caps, no spaces, when you register. I hope to see you there. In this episode of The Biggest Table, I enjoy a rich conversation with author Lore Wilbert about her latest book, The Understory. The discussion delves into themes of nature, grief, and presence as Lore shares her personal journey of finding comfort and healing in the forest. She elucidates how the forest's regenerative processes paralleled her own experiences with faith and personal hardship. The conversation highlights the importance of being present even in moments of pain and how moving forward in life doesn't always mean solving everything at once. Lore also reflects on the significance of community and the role of the table in fostering honest and deep conversations. The episode concludes with insights into Lore's upcoming move and looking forward to an unknown future with hope rooted in faith. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Biggest Table. I am your host, Andrew Camp, and in this podcast, we explore the table, food, eating, and hospitality as an arena for experiencing God's love and our love for one another. And today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Lore Wilbert. Lore has written 3 books, the award-winning Handle with Care, as well as A Curious Faith, and most recently, The Understory. She has a master's in theology, spiritual formation, and leadership from Friends University, and a bachelor's in English from Lee University. Her work has been published in many national publications as well as in several anthologies. She and her husband live on the edge of a river flowing from the Adirondacks in upstate New York with their 2 pups. When she's not writing, she likes to kayak, be in the forest, make art with paper, and garden. So thanks for joining me today, Lore. I'm really excited about this conversation as my wife and I have started reading your book, and really the writing's beautiful, but more importantly, we love the themes that are coming from it. So thanks,
Andrew. Thank you. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah, no, and saw that you had an undergrad degree from English. I was like, oh, okay, your writing just is poetic, it's inviting, it's yeah, and you just tell a wonderful story in your book, and so thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah. So your most recent book is The Understory, and what drew me to it is it's sort of your journey into the forest, really, and just the story underneath the story. So what was sort of the genesis of this new book of yours?
It's a good question. Yeah, so I started out the book telling the story of Tree 103, which is, was the tallest tree in New York, and it fell in a windstorm several years ago. And a friend of mine was the one to discover it having fallen. And so he and I hiked back to it. And I think as we were hiking back to it, I had this sense of just like thinking that I was going to be overwhelmingly grieved to see this fallen giant. And actually what I felt was like, as we were hiking back through this old growth and seeing, other downed trees, just seeing how the forest regenerates. And so a nearby forest professor said, lived, but I prefer to think that she's just not vertical anymore. So the tree is still alive, still contributing nutrients to the soil and to the forest and to the regenerative nature of what ecology is. And so I think sort of thinking through that and thinking through a lot of the things that had happened in my own life and journey with faith and church, I just saw a lot of parallels to like, man, I feel like I've been knocked over. Like, I feel like I'm dead. But I was just really comforted by the idea that what if I'm still alive? I'm just not vertical anymore. And what can happen with us when we're not vertical anymore? Is something good there? Is there something good to be found there?
Right, because part of the beginning of your book too is this new breath prayer that emerges for you. And I won't quote the Latin because I don't speak Latin, but
You
it's
say
really
add
just
some, yeah.
add some.
Yeah,
But
I am
it's
here.
this prayer that I am here, right? Yeah.
Hmm.
And so how does that then contribute with this idea that you're not vertical, but you're still living?
Yeah. I think I've really been struck by the fact that like no matter where, I mean, this is pushing some limits for some people, but like God created man and woman from clay, and scientists tell us now that um that actually there's like stardust in
Hmm.
us, like we are partially made of stardust. And I think that idea of just like, oh, what does it mean that like matter always matters and matter is always here, and it just changes form over, you know, generations and generations and generations. It's just changing form. It's just a new sort of cellular arrangement of something. So what does that mean for me? What does that mean for me as someone who feels my sort of mortality pretty
Hmm.
closely and feels pretty crushed by a lot of the things that have happened in the church and the world over the past decade? What does it mean for me to say like there's something so gloriously alive and here happening? And also, what does it mean for me to not try to sort of get back to the way things used to be, or like try to rush through change or growth to get to some new place, but to just simply say, I'm here and you, God, are with me. I'm here and you, God, are with me. And that's been, I think, a really formative prayer for me over the past 4 or so years, to just take a breath and stop trying to be something I'm not or somewhere I'm not. Like, I'm here
Hmm.
in this form for as long as I'm here in this form, and someday I'm going to take another form.
Right. And that's so powerful, just to be present to our reality.
Yeah.
Because I know I've used the forest at times, and my family and I live in Flagstaff, where we're surrounded by forest. And I've always loved getting out into the forest, but it's always been feels like at times an escape
Mm-hmm.
from life, or, and I think people use it similarly. Like, I just need to get out and get rid of our current life, or get outside of my current being,
Yeah.
and but your challenge and your invitation seems to be actually using the forest as a means, and the understory as a means of actually entering more deeply into my current reality. So what does
Yeah.
that mean? And like, how would you invite listeners to experience that versus an escape?
Mm. Such a good question. I live in this area, the Adirondack region, probably similar to Flagstaff, where people come to vacation, right?
Right.
It's like their vacation spot. And all around here, there are, a lot of the sort of the old money from the city, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, like just
Hmm.
like they have their old camps up here, and they're just giant places. And a lot of those people would only spend, a week or two at these palatial outposts,
Right.
so it was like, and then they would go to some other vacation home in the, Rhode Island or the Berkshires or whatever. And it was just sort of like no matter where they were, they wanted to be somewhere else. And that idea, I think, it really strikes something in me, because I think I struggle with that too. It's like no matter where I am, I kind of want to be somewhere else.
Hmm.
And it's not that I hate where I am or I think there's not like good things happening here, but it's just this belief that like it might be better somewhere else. I
Yeah.
might feel more rested somewhere else. It might be more beautiful somewhere else. It might be this or that somewhere else. And I think there's just a lot of power in saying like, but I'm not. This is where I am, and like I am I am. Like not even I am here, but simply I am. Like I'm here.
Hmm.
I am. And what does God want to do with me and in me and through me in this place? And I think it's it takes a lot of discipline for us to do that, because I think we're afraid or we're angry or there's
Hmm.
some sort of emotion that we don't want to face happening, sort of just below the surface. And so it's easier to kind of run away instead
It
of
is.
being here.
Yeah. And so listeners, I just encourage you, wherever you are this season, just to think, okay, how can you be more present, and um, I know for me, it's the summer. And so kids require more, it seems. And so how to be just here. And I love that I am versus where do I want to be, or what do I want life to look like? Um, that's just such a beautiful invitation. And it is so hard um, because we want things to work out a certain way. And then God comes along and smashes what we think seems to happen. And that seems to be what your book comes out of, is a lot of pain and sorrow, but
Yep.
finding new life through
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's a lot easier just to say that on this side of things.
Right.
When you're actually walking through it, when you're actually going through the sort of decomposition process, and the ways that I talk about, trees essentially decomposing and making way for new life to
Mm-hmm.
come. Like, that doesn't feel glorious. That doesn't feel, no part of that feels good.
No.
It hurts, and a lot of times we go kicking and screaming through that. I did.
Yeah.
I'm not, I don't try to like glorify that process at all in this book.
No.
um I did find beauty in it. I am
Mm-hmm.
finding beauty in it, but I am still finding a heck of a lot of heartache in it. Like, I never want to say on this side of things it's now I'm the tallest tree in New York. I don't say that. Like,
Right. Yeah.
I am still, fallen. I am still not
Mm-hmm.
vertical anymore, and I've just learned to find some goodness in that
Yeah.
space.
Because we still carry the trauma, we still carry the
Yeah.
hurt.
Yeah.
It doesn't go away.
Yep.
But you quote from Basil van der Cloak, right?
Mm-hmm.
That body keeps the score.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that when we try to run from or to summarize what he says, when we try to run from our trauma, we actually close ourselves off,
Yeah. Yeah.
which again is such a hard thing. And so, what was, how did that process look like for you in the forest or in various avenues
Mm,
to enter into instead of run?
yeah. I think for me, I can tend to sort of think about pain a lot. I'm a pretty good mental processor. um, Not so good at verbal processing, not so good at physical processing. And so I think for me, I have to make things tangible, physical, touchable.
Hmm.
They have to have some matter to them in order for me to, I think, metabolize the pain. And if I just stay in this place where I'm just thinking about it, it's just never gonna move through me. And so, um, and that takes different forms. You read my bio. I forget when that bio was written, but like kayaking, making art with paper, going to the forest, doing things with my hand, gardening,
Mm-hmm.
um, even just like snuggling my dog, like doing something with my body
Hmm.
helps to sort of move that grief through, and produce something from it. I talk a lot about decomposition and soil, um and I love Mary Oliver's poem "Things Take the Time They Take," and um that's how the decomposition process works. But something is moving constantly in that decomposition process to turn
Right.
something into like really good, beautiful soil.
Yeah.
Um, but it's got to move.
Yeah. Yeah. And you and I both love the work of Norman Wurzba. And he's transformed my understanding of soil just because he writes about just the microorganisms and the intricacy and the community, and that maybe life isn't about survival of the fittest, but survival in community and working, things working in their natural systems. Uh, and that feels like an apt metaphor for pain and all of life, really, but just that something is always working, and
Mm-hmm.
and that's the idea of Christianity too, that out of death comes new life. But we seem so reluctant, I guess,
Yeah.
to enter into that. And I know for myself, it's hard too. Like, I don't do this well.
Yeah.
Um,
Me either.
but yeah, none of us do it well, but there's always this invitation, and no matter where we go, there's that invitation. And so not sure the question, but I think how do we begin to see life like that then?
So that's a really good question. Like, how do we like sort of draw that ecological truth and like
yeah,
get it inside of us?
yeah,
Yeah. I really love Diane Langberg has this quote that she says, all healing takes time, tears, and talking.
hmm,
And in the book, I sort of allude to the time it takes to decompose, the tears, uh,
hmm,
the so that there's this sort of the time that it takes to decompose, but also like the decomposition process needs water, so we've got to have some
right,
tears, but also like we need talking, we've got to have other microorganisms,
hmm,
and so just the way that the soil sort of becomes its best version of itself, in the same way we need that too. We need time. Things don't happen quickly, and they in fact happen much longer than, like, even when we're like, hasn't it been enough time yet?
yeah,
Probably not. Probably needs more time. But we also need tears. We need to, like I
hmm,
said earlier, we need to have physical expressions of that grief. We can't just think our grief. We have to enact it. But we also need talking, and that's, for me, that has been a real learning curve. I'm not a verbal processor. Don't
hmm,
have a super high tolerance for, or feel like I have a huge need for, a ton of friends to process things with. I'm just not wired like that. Usually, if I say it once, I'm like, okay, I said it.
yeah,
I don't need to say it again. And one of the things I've had to learn is that sometimes we need to say things 4 or 5 or 6 times to, Kurt Thompson talks about speaking to attuned listeners. So,
hmm,
uh, looking for people who are looking for us. He talks about
wow,
that in The Soul of Shame. And so I've had to sort of trust that process of like, okay, I'm going to look for people who are looking for me, and I'm going to actually verbalize painful things out loud, even though that's incredibly difficult for me. Um, and in some ways makes me feel like my grief takes longer. Like, I'm like, if I'm still talking about it, that means it's not dealt with. But it actually is moving the grief through me. It is turning
hmm.
me into something new. And it's necessary.
No, for sure. And that phrase from Kurt Thompson, I love it. Looking for people who are looking for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I think he opens his book, The Soul of Shame, with, we come into the world looking for people who are looking for us.
oh,
And just the idea of like babies coming into the world, looking for people who are looking for them. And I think, I'm 42 and I'm still looking for people who are looking for me.
yeah.
I think we all are. And
Hmm.
I think we can shame ourselves for that in a lot of ways. Like, you should be fine. You shouldn't need people who are looking for you. But
Right.
um, that's not who God made us to be. So,
No, not at
yeah.
all. And I think at times when we're experiencing grief, finding those people who are willing to sit and listen for the
Yeah.
long haul is really hard.
Really
My wife and I are coming through a year of a lot of hurt and pain
hard.
and crushed dreams too. And at times, the first week people were willing, and able, but after a while I don't know if they forget negligently, it's not,
Yeah.
there's nothing spiteful about it. But they're not in it as well. And so it feels hard at times when you're in the midst of a grief cycle to find people who are looking for you, because you feel like nobody's looking for you or nobody remembers or cares. And so how, and I know you said you're not a verbal processor, but how do you, in the midst of the pain that is longer than we expect and want it to be, how do we engage that feeling like we're a burden to people at times?
Mm. I think for me, it's taken some really intentional conversations in my friendships. It's
Hmm.
been me saying the words, I feel like a burden when I say
Hmm.
this, and I'm practicing the virtue of feeling like a burden.
Hmm.
Like taking away sort of the moral shame or moral wrong that we attribute to feeling like a burden. Why do we think that's wrong to feel like a burden? um Somehow that's gotten into us, whether it's just because we're Americans or Western
Yeah.
Christian. I don't know where it came
Yeah.
from, but it's gotten in there, and I think we've attributed some sort of moral wrong to it. And I think saying aloud, like, I'm practicing feeling like a burden, and like the virtue of feeling like a burden to someone is really good for me.
Hmm.
I think it has been one of the best disciplines of my life in the past few years to say, I'm going to take up some space in this friendship. I'm going to be willing to take up space, because I tend to be the person who is a listener and asks a lot of questions. And I feel, I don't know if I'm an empath, but I feel really in tune to people's suffering, and, and have this, like, I don't know whether it's a compulsion or whatever, but to just sort of like draw things out of
Yep.
people, like when you talk about having a bad year, my first inclination is not to continue talking about me. It's to be
Right.
like, oh my God, what happened? And how are you? And how are you? Like what? Yeah. Like it's
Yeah.
to like draw you out. But I think, um, I've had to learn to let myself be drawn out. And to do that has taken some intentional conversations. And it has also meant some broken relationships, because there are
Hmm.
some friendships that can't make that shift.
Right.
And I don't fault them for that. Like, maybe they're learning something different right now, and that's
Yeah.
okay. But it's really hard to find people who are looking for us. But I do think that saying the words aloud
Hmm.
as much as we can, um, helps us to feel a little bit more seen, and willing to be seen. It's like so uncomfortable to be seen, right?
Yeah.
And I think saying the awkward parts, my husband and I always joke that like we're totally fine with awkward silence. Like some people might like rush to
Yeah.
fill that space, and we're like, nope, we're just going to listen and let it be awkward, because something good's going to come out of, Norman Wirsba talks about hospitality as making space for the other
For sure.
and cultivating the life of the other, and then liberating the other into their life. I love
Hmm.
that quote so much, but I love the idea of just like, what does it mean to make space for the other?
Yeah.
Like to expand ourselves. And what does it mean to, like, for me to enter into the space that's been made for me? And it doesn't happen very often, to be honest, but the friendships where it does happen, those are lifelines for me.
Yeah.
And spaces where I want to be really rooted in.
Hmm. And we always get this idea too, as we think, well, if I make space for others, I have to shrink.
Yep.
Um,
Enneagram 9 here.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think it's just that challenge, and
Mm-hmm.
again, I think it's rooted in Americanism, I think, where it's, if I don't get mine,
Yeah.
there's not going to be enough for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but again, what I love about the table is that there's always space for more. And what Jesus shows us in the Gospels is at the table, people can be who they are, and to be okay with that, like he made space for the Pharisees, he made space
Yeah.
for the sinners, the tax collectors. And so how has the table then been transformed as you've entered into this story?
Mm. This is a hard one for me, because so much of our story the past 4-ish years has meant so much grief and loss.
Hmm.
Like, I think before 2020, we were the table, we were the hosts.
Okay.
Like, people were at our house all the time. We were always, pulling tables together to make the table longer.
Wow.
And, you know, serving food together and eating food together and having intentional conversations around the table. That was just kind of who we are. We moved in 2020, and then there were some pretty big relational, which I talk about in the books, some pretty big relational chasms that were created. And so the table for us, I think in a lot of ways has grown a lot smaller. And I say that, but I'm also, I think with the shrinking of our table, it's actually created some like deeper, better conversations, I think.
Yeah.
Like I think about our neighbors who are total pagans. We love them. We adore them. They've come for Christmas a couple times in the past couple of years. And one year, it's just they're an older couple, and we were sitting over charcuterie talking about Jesus for like 2 hours, talking about Jesus and like having a really candid conversation about Jesus. And we made space for their anger and hurt and heartbreak at the ways Christians have treated them through the years. And they made space for us too, as like Jesus followers who are sort of sorting through the mess of what the church looks like these days. So in some ways our table has become smaller, but it's become, I think, more honest, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that feels surprising to me. It's something I think I would have said 5-6 years ago. I would have said, no, we set an honest table. And I think we did. We tried to, but I think grief changes you, like I said, at like a cellular level, and you're able to like be a little bit more honest, maybe.
Yeah. And it just evolves, what honest looks like. I think at various points.
That's true. Yeah.
Changes, and so it's again like what you said about friends not being able to hold that space for you. I think it's the same for ourselves, of like the table, as long as I think we're open to what the table should look like for us at various moments. I think it is a beautiful table, and I have no doubt that your table was beautiful and lively at that time, but you can't go back. You wouldn't go back to what it once was, even in the midst of all the pain and sorrow and shrinking of it. But no, sometimes, because I think we think the table has to ever get bigger, and that's the name of my podcast, is The Biggest Table.
Yeah.
But you found a bigger table through shrinking and through grief and through pain.
Yeah. And I have hopes that someday, our table will be pulling tables together again.
No, right.
But we'll be different people when that happens. And I look forward to that.
And that's, I think, again, it goes back to your prayer, I am here, and so wherever we are, what does here look like? And another quote I loved, and it resonated with me, as you talk about the snow, but, and you had that phrase, snow on snow on snow, and I feel like
Rossetti poem.
Okay. Yeah. And being in Flagstaff, we get snow, and sometimes it's snow on snow on snow, but you write that, but beneath the snow on snow on snow, there is life there yet. Perhaps not the glorious life we envision for ourselves, but something that is here, right here, being. And I just love that quote, because again, this on Easter in Flagstaff this year, we got 6 inches of snow. And so it's not the Easter I'd hoped for. It was just snow on snow on snow. And, our girls are trudging through snow in their Easter dresses and, sandals. But and so like I saw the snow, and I remember even meeting with my spiritual director on Good Friday of like, we're going to get snow, and I want green. I want new life. Like but your point is, underneath the snow on snow on snow is something is regenerating. But again, it was hard for me to see. So how, in the midst of snow, in the midst of waiting for new growth, how do, I guess it is just being present to I am here. But was there more to that quote of like, what does it mean to see beneath the snow?
Yeah, I talk in my chapter on fungi, or maybe it's a chapter on lichen, actually. I talk about labyrinths, and I tell the story of driving out to a labyrinth in the Adirondacks here, and I got there and it was just covered by, 2 feet of snow. And I,
Yeah.
I'd brought my snowshoes and I pulled them on and I, you know, hiked up to the top of the hill, and I was hoping that there would be, even the form of these rocks or something, that I would be something,
Yeah.
some indication of direction. And there was nothing. It was just like a flat field with some like bamboo sticks stuck at like the entrance and the center. And I was like, oh, I might as well just go home. But then I was like, nah, whatever. I know the shape of the Santa Rosa labyrinth and I'm just going to walk it. And so I just
Right.
started to walk in this big, wide open field where, 2 feet beneath that is this beautiful Santa
Mm.
Rosa labyrinth. And, I talk about how sometimes we're just putting one foot in front of the other. We're just like, we're trusting that something good is happening somewhere, even though we can't see it.
Right.
We're just walking forward. And I think it's so tempting in the middle of grief to just, and I do this all the time, is just to like hunker down and like, and when there's snow for weeks and months on end, that's all you want to do is just hunker down. And by Easter, you're like, I'm tired of hunkering down. I
Yeah.
want to get out.
Right.
And that's the way it is here too. Like we're still, it's still cold on Easter. And I think it's just a good reminder to me that like, even though I can't see the work that's happening, even though I can't see the path ahead, like I can still move forward. I can
Mm.
still push through. And yeah, I looked back halfway through my, quote labyrinth,
Yeah.
and the path was a mess. It didn't look like a labyrinth at all. It looked like
No.
somebody was crazy. It's like just like walking back and forth in the middle of this
Yeah.
field. And I thought at that moment, like, I'm just gonna give up.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't. I just kept going. Who cares if you look crazy? Who cares if
Right.
you have no idea what's happening? Like, I think I saw this thing, this reel someone sent me on Instagram this week that was like a spiritual awakening, and it was this little boy who is on a zip line through, I don't know, some like massive zip line,
Yeah.
and he's like, no, 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 and then he's like, yes, 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 and oh, this is so cool, oh my god, this is horrible. Like he just has like every level of emotions during the zip line. It's like just so beautiful, because I'm like, yeah, that's how it feels like sometimes to just walk on snow and trust that
Right.
something good is happening. Like I don't know, but I'm gonna walk.
Yeah.
I'm gonna move my body forward and trust that God is still alive and that
Yep.
something good is happening underneath it all.
No, for sure. Yeah, and that keep walking, keep moving.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it is so hard in the midst of pain because you just, um, you know, I think at times for myself in the midst of pain, I just want to like, okay, I just want to deal with it. Stop. Like, let all of life stop. Like,
Yeah.
let me just deal with it and move on.
Yeah.
But the invitation from you and from the forest is, we keep walking, we keep journeying and trusting that something will happen.
There's this beautiful moment when I'm it's toward the end of the book when I'm in this forest, and my intention wasn't to hike, it wasn't to take a walk. Even I say it was to move from here to here to here. And I think so often when we think like, if I'm going to be here and be present, that means I just need to stay present and stay here. But no,
Right.
I can be here and then I can move to here and then I can move to here.
Here.
So saying that I am here doesn't mean I'm not moving. It just means that I'm present to where I'm moving to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really hard because, like you said, we just want to like kind of hunker down and be like, okay, I'm going to solve it. And then I'm going to, then I'm going to go to there.
Yeah.
But no, you're not. You're going to get there, and you're going to have another thing you've got to process through or grieve or whatever. It's just part of the human experience.
No, it is. And so I'm curious because you've written on sort of rootedness and finding stability and resilience. And now you find yourself on a new journey, embarking on a new journey of moving. So what is that? As you think of the upheaval of moving, because I think it is an upheaval, how does your story then move forward?
Yeah. I think a lot of times when I think this is just like American Christianity. I don't know because I've never been, any other kind of
Yeah.
Christian, but I think that we think if something's hard, it must be meant for us. Like
Yeah.
we just need to stay in the hard,
Right.
we need to commit to it. And if we quit or we move or we fail or we say this is not for me anymore, that we're somehow, not faithful or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And I think for us, we're coming to 4 years actually. This week is 4 years since we came up here
Wow.
and renovated our house and had a whole bunch of things hit the fan, and
Yeah.
life changed in some pretty dramatic ways for us. And I think we've been able to say, here has been what it is, and also here is not where we belong
Mm.
anymore. And we feel free to leave
Wow.
here,
Yeah.
knowing that, like, I think we've tried our best to be faithful here. We've tried our best
Mm-hmm.
to advocate for things that need to be advocated for, to say hard things. But we feel free to say, like, this is not the place for us
Yeah.
to continue to flourish.
Hmm.
In the book, I talk about how my mother-in-law calls a weed, um, oh gosh, totally just forgot what she calls it. She just says it's a plant that's in the wrong place or something like that.
Okay.
And so I've been known to think some weeds are beautiful and to dig them up and move them from the roadside or my neighbor's garden and
Yeah.
move them to my own, because I think some weeds are beautiful. And
Yeah.
I talk about how Jesus, like, his whole ministry is saying, like, you are here, but I've come to put you here. Like, I've come to
Mm.
put you here in me. And like his whole ministry was one of movement. It was one of helping us to see that, like, we are growing in soil that's not good for us, or
Right.
we're not going to be appreciated in that soil, that garden, but we'll be appreciated in his garden.
Yeah.
And like, that's okay. That's all right.
Mm-hmm.
There's no shame in that. There's nothing wrong with that. And so yeah, we're packing up our house. We're, like I said to you at the beginning of this,
Yeah.
it's getting listed today, and just sent the photos off to the realtor, and we'll see what happens. We have no idea what our future holds. We'll see what happens.
So as you look forward to a future that is unclear,
Mm-hmm.
how 4 years ago that future may have been very different for you, I'm going to guess. So as you look forward to the unknown, like,
Mm-hmm.
what lessons from the book do you carry with you that give you hope and
Mm-hmm.
resilience?
It's really good. I think the biggest thing is that the idea of I am here, which means that my home is wherever I am. Um,
Hmm.
and I think you can say things like, well, my home is wherever my family is or wherever Jesus is. But I think where the reality is, like, I am home wherever I am.
Hmm.
And that idea, I think, like I said, earlier, we're always kind of looking for the different place to be. We're always kind of, swiping left on
Yeah.
life, and or right. I don't know which way you're supposed to swipe on those things, but
Yeah, you and I both.
um, but like, if our home is here and our home isn't, for me, if my home is in Jesus, then my whole life is oriented around Jesus. It's not oriented around a particular community or a place or
Hmm.
whole, even house, like this house, which we love. We love our house so much, but it's not what I'm oriented around. I'm
Huh.
oriented around Jesus. And so
Hmm.
Jesus goes with me. Um I can't see the future, but I know Jesus, and I
Hmm.
know Jesus is good, and I know he loves me and he loves us, and we are loved by him. And I know that has um God is a creator, and he is already creating the place for us to land.
Hmm.
And I don't know that I ever felt afraid that that wasn't true before 4 years ago, but I think I did sort of feel a little bit more self-sufficient, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I don't feel very self-sufficient these days.
No. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I think just to invite, again, listeners, if you're listening to this and you're facing an unknown future, like how can Lori's prayer, I am here, be a prayer for you, for me, for all of us, you know? I think there's a lot of unknowns in 2024 left for us.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and so I think just that, okay, I am here, I am loved.
Mm.
And even if you're not a person of faith and you're listening to this, like can you be present and know that you are loved deeply? Well, thank you. There's a question I love to ask all of my guests, and I'll just ask it and let you answer it. But as you think about the church, what is the story you want the church to tell?
Ooh. Hmm. I want the story to be a story about Jesus and not about agendas that we're for or against, or even doctrine that we believe is historical or true, but it's the incarnate word of God, Jesus. I think, my husband and I have sort of, we have not had a church for 4 years, which is one of the reasons that we're moving. So we really do love the church and we want to find a place to worship with believers. But one of the sort of rubrics for us has been, we don't want to be in a place that's flying an American flag, and we don't want to be in a place that's flying a rainbow flag. And it's not because we're against either of those two flags necessarily. It's because we're against anything that isn't like anything that's sort of a distraction from Jesus Christ himself. And we want to be in a place that is about Jesus, for Jesus, and that preaches Christ alone. And we want to be, that's our hope for the church, is that we would be Jesus followers more than we're Fox News followers or whatever agenda followers, but that we would be looking to Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith.
Oh, no, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And as we wrap up, some fun questions, as we transition. It's always a rough transition, but it's, it's a fun one. And so just some fun questions about food for you, Lori. What's one food you refuse to eat?
Refuse. Raw onions.
Okay.
I mean, unless they're pickled, I'm just not going to ever want raw onions on anything.
Okay, fair. Yeah. Then on the other end of the spectrum, what's one of the best things you've ever eaten?
Oh, like 4 years ago, I went to this farm to table restaurant and they had saffron, not mussels. What are they called? Seafood, little round seafood things. Oh my
Clams,
God.
oysters,
No.
scallops.
Scallops. They had saffron scallops, and it was the best thing. I will never forget how delicious and memorable that meal was. It was so delicious.
A perfectly cooked scallop is...
Oh my God. It was like, it melted in our mouth. It was just amazing.
Yep.
And the saffron was great.
Awesome. And then finally, there's a conversation amongst chefs, and it's a little morbid, but it's about their last meal. As in, if you knew you only had one last meal to enjoy, what would that meal be?
You're going to laugh at me. It would be peanut butter and jelly on Jewish rye bread with corn chips.
I feel like there's a story behind this.
No
Lori.
story. I don't know. It's just like the ultimate comfort food for me. Like,
okay.
I grew up in a really big family, and so PB&Js were sort of the name of the game a lot of life. And I don't know, there's something really, I grew up outside of Philadelphia, so Jewish rye bread was everywhere. It was
Okay.
ubiquitous. So I don't know. I just love, that's like when I'm sick, that's what I want. When I'm sad, that's what I want. So yeah.
Okay. Do you have a favorite jam for your peanut butter and jelly?
A strawberry jam.
Okay.
Yeah, with whole berries in it.
Yes.
None of
Absolutely.
that. None of that jelly stuff.
No, definitely a jam.
Yeah.
Well, Lori, I really appreciate your
Mm.
vulnerability, your invitation, and your wisdom for people. And so if people want to learn more about your work or hear more from you, where might they be able to find you?
You can find me at lorewilbert.com. It's LOREWILBERT.com. That's where I mostly hang out, but I'm also
Yep.
on Instagram at Lore Wilbert. And that's pretty much it these days.
No, I understand. Awesome. Yeah. And for all of you listeners, do pick up the Understory. It's a beautiful book that I haven't quite finished yet, but it's one of those books that's meant to be slowly read and enjoyed. And I think there's wisdom, so much wisdom and invitation for us in this book. And so thank you, Lori, for your gift to the church in the midst of your grief and your pain. Thank you for helping others, including myself, give voice to what we all are experience at some point.
Thanks, Andrew.
My pleasure. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with others. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Biggest Table, where we explore what it means to be transformed by God's love around the table and through food. Until next time, bye.